Now, a significant part of the guide for the perplexed is about the figurative language used in the Bible. Maimonides attempts to show us how we are likely to be so wrong in understanding the Bible when we take everything or most of the things we read as literal. He says much of the Bible, and here I'm talking about the Old Testament, is written in figurative language. Like things are not literal. Even the idea or the concept of creation, it tells us how that story is told in the book of Genesis. It's not really literal. It is figurative. And now, in the first parts of the book, he looks at and this is what he says. He says that the Torah speaks according to the language of man. That's where we need to start with that. Those who wrote the Bible understood these very complex ideas out there, but there was no way to explain them to the masses other than by using the language that we, the masses, use. That how, as somebody who is in the business of copywriting or writing, we are always encouraged that you try as much as you can to use the language of the person you are writing for, so that they can easily relate with that content and understand it. Because if you don't, then they are likely to struggle, and you are likely to miss persuading or informing them. So it seems like this is the same thing that was happening when the Bible was being written, that they needed to write it using the language that man understands, even though they were describing concepts that were so complex, and some of them were beyond they were beyond the understanding of humans. At least that's what Maimonides says. So they decided to write in the language that man speaks. He says, it's all ignorant and superficial readers take them literal, not in a figurative sense. Like people who are superficial and ignorant, when they read the Bible, they just take things so literal, like they see things and they think what they are reading, it's literally that, while that language is being used for as a figurative language. He gives us example, and he says, and I've mentioned this in another video, when you read the book of Genesis, there is this verse that says, let us make man in our zelem, in our image. This particular verse has always made me confused, and on different levels. So there's this level of, is God like humans? Does he look like human? That's one level of the confusion that verse brings. The other level is, why does God say let us and not let I? So does it mean there are many gods? So reading this the guide for the perplexed, in different parts, he talks about this verse. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the aspect of the figurative meaning of it, not in terms of how many gods, because I'm going to have another video where I'll talk about why let us, according to Maimonides, what does that mean? So in this case, he says, the image being talked about here is not physical image, and I've talked about God being incorporeal according to Maimonides, which means God has no form or substance, or so he can't even be like humans. So he says what was meant here is the divine intellect that has been adored to us humans, which according to Maimonides is not found in other animals. So we are like the only ones who have this divine intellect. And in fact, in another part of the book, and we're going to talk about this, Maimonides kind of explained this concept of, I did read a book about Moore's law. I forget what is called, the Moore's law or something like that. I might be wrong, but there's this book where the writer describes the higher and the lower human being. And the higher is the intellect and the lower is the animal. And I thought he was the first one who came up with that idea, but looks like Maimonides had this idea before. And in another part of the book, and we're going to talk about that, he talks about walking with the angel on your right shoulder and the devil on your left, which is basically the same idea. We are going to talk about that later. Now here he says, when that verse says, let us make man in our own image, what it's meant is give them the divine intellect. it doesn't mean that let them have the physical form like us, like God. So so it so basically, and this is just, I can go on and, for example, talk about the use of words like and God saw. So when you read something like God saw, and that this was good, then you are likely to think then God has eyes. Or when you say so, and in this case it says it simply means the intellectual perception of God. It doesn't mean that God has eyes like we do. So he can still perceive without like eyes like what we have as humans. There is others like God say thus say the Lord, the heavens are my throne and the earth my footstool. That is Isaiah somewhere in the book of Isaiah. He says, when you read that, you are likely to think, so that means God must be like a human, and somewhere in heaven he has this seat, a throne where he sits, and then something like that, that then he must have some substance and form such that he can sit in heaven and his feet can touch the earth. But Maimonides says what that means actually just means God's greatness and essence. It's just trying to bring that idea. It's not really about the physical form. So, and the others like to go, when you read somewhere in the Bible and the word God goes or comes or things like that, then you are likely to assume that God must be in one place, then God will move to another place. And Maimonides tells us those are not really what these writers were saying, but they were just saying, for example, the Lord will come down in the book of Exodus, I think chapter, maybe is it chapter 14, 11. The Lord will, we says what that really means is the God, when you read the Lord will come down, he says, you should interpret it as the Lord will manifest himself. And God came down and God manifested himself. So there are so many. In fact, there are like 70 or 80 chapters where it goes into detail about specific words and phrases in the Bible that people easily interpret as literally. And then in fact, the main reason why he has all these chapters talking about the figurative language use is trying to drive us to this point of not making the mistake of thinking of God as being corporeal and understanding that God is incorporeal. And now here is another thing. It seems like Maimonides learned a lot about this concept of the figurative language used in the Bible from a guy known as Onkelos. No, I don't know. I didn't know about Onkelos, but it seems like he was a very respected Jewish scholar, and it seems like he had written a lot of books around the topic or the concept of figurative language used in the Bible. That's where he picks a lot of, seems like, ideas about this. Now, the entire point about figurative language in the Bible is trying to encourage us to avoid making the mistake of thinking of God as being corporeal, like having form and substance, and in fact thinking of God as looking like humans. So, and also it also adds into the other things that he talks about, so that we don't think of God as having like being in the particular place so that they can move, things like that. So that's what he tries to achieve with that. He talks about, and then there is a place where he talks about senses. I've mentioned a little bit of that, and he talks about, after said by saying that God sees, we mean that he perceives things. He hears is identical to with saying he perceives audible things. It doesn't mean he has ears. There's all these phases of God, so God smelled, things like that. And the point, let me cut this short. The point that Maimonides is trying to make when it comes to describing how language is used figuratively in the Bible is that trying to encourage us not to think of God as corporeal.